Ariel Helwani wanted to be the LeBron of MMA media.
My goal was to be the face of MMA media.
Today, he's the most trusted journalist in MMA and a 15-time Journalist of the Year winner. But in 2016, the UFC tried to silence him.
I don't give a shit what Ariel Helwani thinks.
Fair enough.
Who the f is Ariel Helwani to question anything that we do?
They banned him for life, revoked his credentials in front of other media members, and told him he'd never cover the sport again. Dana White personally made sure the entire MMA establishment turned against him. So how did the UFC's attempt to destroy his career backfire so badly? On June 4th, 2016 at UFC 199, Ariel Helwani broke one of the biggest stories in MMA history. Brock Lesnar, the former UFC heavyweight champion and current WWE superstar, was coming back to fight at UFC 200. He posted the article hours before the UFC planned to announce it themselves.
I don't sit on news. The last thing anyone should ever do is sit on news. If you have it confirmed, you gotta go with it. If you're sitting on it, you're not doing it right.
And Dana White was furious. A UFC public relations representative approached Ariel. They said he needed to come to the back of the arena. And when he got there, Dana White was waiting.
So we go to the back. It was just a hallway, a few steps from the media room. The main event's about to start, by the way. And Dana White is there. Some other members of his team are there. And he just says to me, "You're out. Get out of here. You're done. We don't want you here anymore. Go to Bellator."
The story was that he was supposedly being too negative, but Dana basically wanted him to ask permission before breaking the story, which isn't exactly how journalism works. So security escorted Ariel and his team out of the building, right in front of the other media members.
Someone stayed with us as we packed all our stuff. It was disappointing, you know. Michael Bisping's music was playing and it was just all very surreal. They watched us like we were, you know, I felt like I was being watched like I was a dog.
He didn't even get to see Michael Bisping's historic knockout of Luke Rockhold in the main event. The UFC announced it would be a lifetime ban. And when Ariel went live on the MMA Hour from his home, he was visibly emotional. But just a few months earlier, the UFC had already gotten him fired once. So why did the UFC have it out for Ariel so badly? To understand that, you need to know what really drives him.
I remember telling my parents in 2001 that there's this sport called mixed martial arts that's not quite, mainstream and popular just yet, but I think in 10 years it's going to be popular, and there's no one really covering it. There's no one really owning it. There's no Howard Cosell of MMA is what I told them, and I want to be that guy.
So after graduating college, he took an internship at HBO and worked his way up to being a sports production assistant. Then he landed a job at Spike TV, which at the time was the home of UFC broadcasts. He thought this would be the perfect opportunity to get inside the world of professional MMA coverage. But within a week, he realized he was never going to get the chance. Spike was just a distribution channel. Ariel just wanted to be an MMA journalist, so he made a big decision.
I remember going to my boss's office after a week and saying, "I don't think this job is for me. I'm kind of a crazy, passionate guy," and I said, "It's time for me to go." Yeah. He was very upset. He said this was the biggest mistake of my career, all that stuff. And it's in that moment, as they made me sit on the sidelines for a month and a half until they replaced me, I started my own website, and I wanted to prove to people that I can interview fighters better than anyone. And so my goal was between October of 2007 and April 1st, 2008, I was going to post an interview with a fighter every morning and try to use that website as a launching pad to get a real job. And luckily it worked.
He launched jerrypark.com in October 2007 and gave himself 6 months to make it work.
I started my own website, and I wanted to prove to people that I can interview fighters better than anyone. And so my goal was between October of 2007 and April 1st, 2008, I was going to post an interview with a fighter every morning and try to use that website as a launching pad to get a real job. And luckily it worked. I didn't care if 10 people or 10,000 people looked at the site. I just wanted people to know that I could interview fighters.
The problem is, he didn't know anyone, so he started cold messaging fighters.
I used to reach out to fighters via MySpace, by the way. That's how long ago this was.
Not the big names the UFC pushes, but the guys no one else wanted to talk to. Mid-card fighters, prospects, anyone who would respond. He showed up over-prepared to every interview, and he actually listened, giving the fighters a chance to get their points across. Instead of reading off a script, he had real conversations.
I believe strongly that you should not have any questions written down. Everyone has their own formula, and that's great, but this is just mine. Why? Because I don't want to stick to a script. If you and I were going to get coffee right now, I'm not showing up with a sheet of questions and going, all right, number 3 is, how was your weekend? We're just talking, and you're saying something, and then I'm asking you a follow-up, and we're just going back and forth like a ping pong match, and it's a conversation. Ultimately, the best interviews feel like conversations as opposed to interrogations.
And the fighters noticed immediately. This wasn't some UFC PR handler asking scripted questions. This is someone who genuinely cared about their perspective. By 2009, his reputation was solid enough that AOL hired him for MMAfighting.com, and that's when he launched the MMA Hour. For the first time in MMA history, fighters had a platform where they could speak freely. No PR handlers, no time limits, no UFC censorship. Just hour-long conversations where they could say what they actually thought. So they started choosing Ariel over official UFC media. And for the UFC, that was the problem. By 2011, Ariel was everywhere. And at that point, the UFC couldn't really ignore him, so they decided to bring him inside. He joined Fox Sports as their MMA insider on UFC Tonight. It was a massive deal. The first time a major broadcast network was regularly airing live MMA, and Ariel was the face of it. In March 2011, Dana White personally called him to Las Vegas to break huge news. The UFC had bought Strikeforce, the second biggest MMA promotion in the world. Dana sat down with Ariel on camera and gave him the exclusive.
We're inside the UFC headquarters, joined by UFC President Dana White. And Dana, for the past year or so, you've been telling us you've got a lot of quote-unquote big things happening in the future, and more specifically this year. I think you have a very big announcement to make. UFC has purchased Strikeforce. Is that true?
That is true.
For a few years, the relationship worked perfectly. Ariel was on Fox covering the biggest fights, interviewing the biggest stars. The MMA Hour was still running independently, but his Fox work gave him mainstream credibility. But there was a problem most people don't know about. Ariel's paycheck wasn't coming from Fox. It was coming directly from Zuffa, the UFC's parent company.
I don't want to get any check from Zuffa. I don't want that at all. I've turned down opportunities from not just Zuffa, from every other promotion out there. At some point, I've talked to every single one, and I've turned them down. I want to be a journalist. I want to be unbiased. I don't want to be tied to a single person.
Fox hired him to cover the UFC, but the UFC was actually paying his salary, which was obviously a massive conflict of interest. At the time, Ariel rationalized it.
Hated this, and I have the emails to prove it, and I tried to figure out a way. I even, thought about just working for free. I wanted to be on TV so bad. I wanted to be covering. It's not like I can go from the TNT broadcast team to the ABC broadcast team to the CBS broadcast team to the Fox Sports broadcast team. There's only one broadcast team if you want to be a part of the broadcast team that covers the #1 organization in the world. There's only one, and that's Fox.
He told himself the money was flowing through Fox, so it was technically fine. And for 4 years, it didn't matter. As long as he stayed in the UFC's lane, the arrangement worked. But Ariel wanted to be a real journalist, so that was never going to happen. The second he started discussing anything serious, the system fell apart.
They would get mad at me. The UFC would get mad when I would talk about free agency, when I would talk about unions, when I would talk about fighter pay. The type of crap that we listen to every single day, that's just a part of I listen to podcasts all day. I love that stuff. It was never below the belt. It was never talking about personal stuff, family. It was just, but they just want ass-kissing coverage.
And it all came to a head in March 2016 when Ariel had Rory McDonald on the MMA Hour. Rory was unhappy with the UFC's extension offer, planning to fight out his deal, and wanted to test free agency. In other words, exactly the kind of honest conversation the MMA Hour was built for.
I'm sure, though, you prefer fighting in Ottawa as opposed to Brisbane, right?
Yeah, definitely. I don't really like traveling that far to fight. That's why I said, I'm not really down to travel that far. But if you renew my contract and give me a little bit more money, then, I'll do it. But I'm not fighting over there for 50 grand,
And Lorenzo Fertitta was furious.
And Lorenzo would keep telling Dana, like, this guy, he's not loyal to us. He's talking about fighter pay. Like, why do you like this guy so much? Why do you have it? I think Dana liked me until the very, very end. But I think it was Lorenzo, the one who was not a fan of mine and didn't like that I talked about the business. Like I said, free agency, the competition.
For the UFC, McDonald discussing free agency was dangerous. It told other fighters they had options. So within days, the UFC started blocking Ariel on social media. Dana White's account, Lorenzo Fertitta's account, the official UFC account, all of them unfollowed or blocked him. It was psychological warfare, cutting him off from fighters, coaches, anyone who could have engaged with him publicly. Then, the next morning after the McDonald interview, Ariel got a call from Fox.
Around 2 hours later, I got a call from a higher up official at Fox, and I was told I was done from UFC Tonight as well, that I was done from Fox altogether.
No explanation, no discussion, no chance to defend himself. Fox had the power to push back. They were a major broadcast partner, but they caved into the pressure immediately to protect their UFC deal. So Ariel was fired, but he still had the MMA Hour. And for the first time in years, he was completely unconstrained. No Fox restrictions, no Zuffa paycheck controlling what he could report. So instead of backing down, he went on a rampage. For 3 months straight, he broke every single UFC story he could find.
So I went on a rampage from March to June of that year. I tried to break every single story under the sun. Like I was a man possessed. And I did a pretty good job of it.
At Fox, he had to sit on things because they were a UFC broadcast partner. Now, there was no restraint. Matchmaking changes, fighter injuries, contract disputes. If it was happening behind the scenes, Ariel reported it. April and May 2016 is absolute chaos for the UFC. McGregor tweeted he was retiring and got pulled from UFC 200. Then he tweeted he's back. Then Dana announced Jon Jones vs. Daniel Cormier as the new main event. Chris Weidman pulled out of the UFC 199 with a neck injury. The UFC was scrambling to hold these cards together, and every time they made a move, Ariel knew about it before they announced it. He had fighters, managers, and coaches feeding him information directly, and the UFC became convinced Ariel had a mole inside the company. Someone leaking information from the executive level.
The UFC perspective was that there was a mole. They believed that someone was giving Ariel information, and that information he was using to scoop the UFC's official promotions. So the UFC, which is a private company, they don't have to have, you don't have to let people in to your business, your private company, to come and report. And so they felt like he was somehow or another getting a hold of this inside information, releasing it, and making them look bad.
Swear to God, I had no mole. I just had contacts. I had managers, I had fighters, I had coaches that were very kind to me and understood that I was just trying to do journalism. That's it. I wasn't malicious. I wasn't trying to unearth dirty secrets about them. I was just doing sports journalism. That's it.
By June 2016, Ariel was more dangerous to the UFC than he'd ever been. UFC 199 was coming up, and the UFC had 2 massive announcements planned. But Ariel broke both stories hours before they could, so the UFC decided to make him an example. After the lifetime ban, a ton of fighters from Jon Jones to Daniel Cormier and Chris Weidman all publicly threw their support behind him. Mainstream sports journalists called it an attack on journalism itself, and the hashtag #FreeHelwani trended all around the world, which forced the UFC to reverse the decision after just 48 hours.
That's kind of cool, because that means that public support made them lift that, but it also must mean that they worked out whatever the f it was.
But even though the ban technically got lifted, the punishment didn't actually stop. It just became harder to see. Ariel got his credentials back, but attending UFC events became a completely different experience. And in 2017, the feud kicked up a gear again. Ariel got hired by Showtime to cover the Mayweather-McGregor press tour, the biggest combat sports event of the year.
What's up, Los Angeles? Ladies and gentlemen, the notorious Conor McGregor!
Baby, we did it!
But hours before the Los Angeles press conference, Showtime told him the UFC specifically requested his removal.
So he was supposed to be a part of it, and then last minute, he flew there and everything. Last second, Showtime told him that Dana White or the UFC specifically asked that he's not on the show anymore. So he's
They've
not on
always
there
had a
anymore.
contentious relationship with him. They just don't like him.
And they waited to the last minute of the very first press conference they had for the fight.
It's interesting. I feel like it's almost good for Ariel.
This wasn't even a UFC event. It was a boxing match promoted by Mayweather's team, but the UFC had enough leverage to get him pulled anyway. By this point, Dana was sounding off at every opportunity.
He's a victim. The guy's a victim. Okay, he's just one of those. He's a pussy, and he's just a big crybaby victim.
It got to the point that attending UFC events became genuinely hostile, and it was only going to get worse. In May 2018, ESPN signed a massive 5-year, $1.5 billion deal with the UFC, and they also hired Ariel Helwani as their main MMA analyst. He was fired from Fox for essentially just being a journalist. Now the biggest sports network in the world wanted him, and it was a dream come true. But for Dana White, it was a nightmare. ESPN is the platform he'd always wanted the UFC on, and the first thing they did was hire the one journalist who publicly exposed his institutional control. Dana allegedly raised hell trying to block the hire. He even tried to derail Ariel's first day on the job, but ESPN went through with it anyway, and Ariel became one of the company's most visible personalities. But behind the scenes, it was a mess. Security still escorted him out before Dana arrived at events. The UFC pressured ESPN to prevent him from breaking stories, and ESPN barely defended him. The network depended on the UFC for content, so they couldn't risk the relationship.
There were so many politics for me at ESPN because of my relationship or lack thereof with Dana White and the UFC that it became uncomfortable for me going to events. They did not make me feel welcome. They made me feel lesser than. They would, they would tell all the fighters and the managers to not give me information and to give it to the other reporter at ESPN so that I could look worse in the eyes of the bosses. Like they were trying to sabotage my standing at ESPN.
And maybe worst of all, despite Ariel hosting multiple shows and generating millions of views, ESPN never really spent time promoting him. So when his contract was up, Ariel had a big decision to make.
And now credit to ESPN, they still offered me a deal. Was it a good deal? No, it was just the same deal. There was no raise. So 3 years, there I am, doing NBA, doing ESPN radio, doing E60, doing all this extra stuff, hoping to prove to them that I'm worth much more, and I got the same thing, and that was deflating. But I actually strongly considered, and was this close to just, I'm at ESPN, it's going to be fine. But part of what came about talking to the therapist was I realized that the main reason why I was considering staying was to stick it to the UFC, and Dana White in particular. Meaning, I knew they wanted me out, and I didn't want to let them win. And I was like, I'm just going to stay here just in spite of them. And then I realized that the only one really losing out in that arrangement is me. And so I had to figure that out. I had to open the clouds in my brain. And I realized that that was a real silly reason to stay at a job. That's why I ultimately decided to move on.
After leaving ESPN in 2021, Ariel pieced together work across a bunch of different platforms. The MMA Hour returned to MMA fighting. He launched an exclusive podcast on Spotify. He signed with BT Sport for boxing and MMA coverage. And he started a Substack newsletter.
I decided that I wanted to do things on my own. And I really kind of decided, like, you know what? I could create a puzzle, a pie, if you will, for myself, where I'm doing X for this guy, Y for this guy, Z for that guy. And thank God, I'm a year plus into that, and it worked. All the things came together. No one had issues with each other. So I was talking to someone who works for another network last week, and he's like, man, some way, somehow you have become like the Switzerland of like sports television. Like you're on one day this summer, I did a job for HBO and Showtime on the same day.
Right.
Like no one gets to do that.
The trouble is, he was building massive audiences for other companies. MMA Fighting got the traffic from his show. Spotify got the subscribers. BT Sport got the views. Ariel was doing all the work, and everyone else owned the platform. And that's when he realized something. For years, His power came from having access, but access only works as long as someone lets you have it. So, in August 2024, when MMA Fighting and Spotify both offered him renewals, he turned them both down. Instead, he launched Uncrowned with Yahoo Sports. But this time, it was different.
I really felt that at this point in my life and in my career, it was time to take that next step. The next step in terms of owning my content, the next step in terms of being a leader, being a boss, the next step in terms of partnering with a great outlet, with a great distributor, with a great broadcast partner. And part of my thinking over the last few years in particular has been, I don't want to be just known as an MMA guy.
The Ariel Helwani Show aired 4 times per week from a dedicated studio in New York, plus other shows covering boxing, wrestling, and MMA. There was no UFC pressure, no corporate interference, no one telling him what he could or couldn't cover. After 20 years, Ariel Helwani finally had what he always needed: complete independence. And within a year, everything started blowing up. The Ariel Helwani Show has generated tens of millions of views on YouTube. Uncrowned social accounts have hit millions of views. It's become one of Yahoo Sports' top performing pages. And despite all that, Yahoo never interferes editorially. They support Ariel with whatever he needs, but they never tell him what to cover or how to cover it.
23 days in, the love and attention and the support that we've received from Yahoo has been unbelievable. And what I love so much about it is, like, we're partnering with them. We're both in it together. I'm not just an employee of Yahoo Sports, and that's huge.
Dana White has institutional power. He controls the UFC, grants credentials, decides who gets access. But now Ariel has something else entirely: market power. He owns his audience. Millions of people follow him regardless of whether the UFC approves.
So the last UFC event that I went to in person that I was credentialed for was March of 2020, literally like 3 days before the world shut down. I have not applied for a credential since then. The relationship stays like this until I'm 85. I can't complain.
He doesn't need credentials to break stories. His sources trust him directly. He doesn't need to attend UFC press conferences. His audience watches his commentary instead. In 2016, banning Ariel mattered because he needed institutional access to reach people. But now, he reaches more people than he ever did before. And Dana has had to completely change his tune. In September, Dana appeared on Logan Paul's podcast, and when Logan mentioned that Ariel was upset about the relationship, you could see him soften.
How's he doing?
He's doing well.
Oh, good.
He's doing well.
Yeah.
He's upset. He's upset that the relationship is what it is with the UFC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm upset about it too.
Well, maybe there's a
maybe we can figure this thing out, and we should probably all get back together.
It was the first hint of reconciliation in nearly a decade, if it was genuine. The thing is, after all this time, after all these years of trying to silence him, Ariel doesn't need an apology. Dana White can ban journalists from UFC events. He can't ban them from owning their audience. And that's the power Ariel has now, something Dana White can never take away again. But Ariel isn't the only person who's fallen out of UFC's favor. Make sure to watch this video next. Thanks for watching.